Hi everyone, I'm Vanessa Taylor and welcome to Matters Open Door webinar series. Today we are excited to talk about the art of thought leadership. Things like the benefits and demands of effective programs, how to choose the right spokespeople and topics, and how to find the media targets that will help you earn meaningful coverage for your brand. But first, who are we? We are public relations experts from Matter, a brand elevation agency. Matter takes PR, digital marketing, and creative services and combines them to create strategic campaigns that inspire action and build value. Your hosts today are Account Director and Leader of Media Strategy, Emily Quirk, Account Manager, Kat Knox, and Special Guest Star, Executive Editor of the Boston Business Journal, Doug Banks. Emily and Kat, take it away.
Thanks, Vanessa, and welcome everyone to the Art of Thought Leadership. We're excited to be here and have Doug Banks of the BBJ in studio with us. Let's get started. My colleague Kat Knox will kick things off.
Thanks, Em. So first, what is thought leadership? Thought leadership leverages an individual's insight on a specific idea, topic, solution, or trend, positioning them as a go-to source for knowledge.
One example that I can think of, Kat, is if you're on the leadership team, let's say, of a national trade organization in information privacy, you want to be seen as an industry expert in your field and eventually have that tech policy reporter at the Washington Post calling you regularly for comment.
Absolutely. A successful thought leadership strategy supports organizational business goals, making it an essential pillar of any communications plan. While thought leadership is part of a strategic PR plan, it's never self-promotional and is always educational and forward-thinking.
So who can be a thought leader? Typically, we look for a member of the C-suite or leadership team, but really this could be anyone with ideas, passion, and experience. A key factor to keep in mind, though, is availability. Be sure that the individual that you're looking to elevate has time to dedicate to content creation, to interviews, and timely media requests.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point.
What kind of characteristics should you look for in a thought leader? They got to have deep industry experience, number one. They need to have a unique or bullish perspective. Media do not want watered down commentary or more of the same. The thought leader should be confident, strong communicator, and welcome constructive dialogue. Doug, what are some characteristics you look for in expert sources?
Thanks, Emily. I think you've covered a couple of these already. You mentioned sort of that national trade organization person. Timeliness is huge. When a journalist is reaching out and they want to talk to someone who's an expert source, who can be a thought leader on a specific topic, like, certainly in the business these days, everything is 24/7. We're working so fast. Where a lot of journalists are pretty under-resourced. Like, if we don't get that response pretty quickly, we're moving on to the next person, and then you lose your chance. So timeliness is super important. I think candor is also critical. Knowing that you're talking to someone who's, as you mentioned, not self-promotional. They're looking to help the reporter. They're looking to not promote their own agenda. They're really giving some expert. They obviously have to be an expert, right? And then candor is so critical because they got to be able to get to it quickly. So they got to be articulate and just really, ideally they're a little bit unvarnished. They're not. You don't want someone so polished that they're going to speak in bromides. You want someone who's going to, give you something that you can work with.
That's great. Thank you.
And the timeliness, is that like within hours or, we talking days? And I'm certain it depends on the event or kind of the breaking news issues that are going on.
Yeah, it really depends on the medium. If it's the Washington Post and they're working on a quick story, it's a matter of minutes. If it's the Boston Business Journal, generally we would say we need this by Friday, or we need this by next week, or we need this by 2 o'clock. And
right.
So, just having that availability to be able to turn it around quickly is key, because there's nothing worse than having we've had PR folks who've said, hey, I have this great source for you, and then we call that person and we don't hear from them for 2 hours, and we needed them in 2 minutes.
Right.
Great point.
Well, now that we have a solid understanding of thought leadership and the characteristics of our thought leaders, let's talk about ways to put their expertise into practice. Social media is a great place to start when it comes to thought leadership. focus your activity on platforms that align with your target audience. For B2B brands and their thought leaders, that's likely LinkedIn. Make sure your profile is optimized with a photo and bio, because this is usually the first place a reporter will look when considering you for an interview. You should also be publishing content and engaging regularly. If you come across a great article in Forbes, don't just share it. Use the comments section to offer your own thoughts and perspective on the subject. You can also share your opinion on the latest trends, actionable tips or strategies, or inspirational content. The key is to look for opportunities to elevate your own voice, not just share someone else's. Make it a priority to engage with other industry experts, media influencers, and their colleagues by liking, commenting on, and sharing their content, and join relevant networking groups.
That's a great point in terms of media influencers, and kind of following media on social media channels is a great way to also understand what they're covering day to day, so that when you're pitching them your expert commentary, you're on point and know their beat.
Absolutely. Contribute content is also a great opportunity to offer tips and advice for your target audience while also controlling the narrative. Newsrooms are overstretched. Trade outlets especially operate with minimal staff and rely on contributed content, commentary from industry experts to fill the pages of their magazines and drive traffic to their websites. It's really a win-win. Interviews and Q&As are a great way to showcase thought leaders' vision or opinion on a specific topic or trend. Here's an example of an interview we landed for a local construction client, leveraging their thought leader on drone technology and robotics. The interview highlighted his thoughts on the industry's tech standards and what lies ahead. Industry and trade publications, local media, and blogs or websites of relevant professional organizations are a great place to seek opportunities such as this. Doug, what do you think makes a strong interview with a thought leader?
I think you nailed it. The example you gave is ideal. Someone who can add to and not just regurgitate the news, right? You want someone who's looking ahead. Business journal readers across the country are always looking for what's next, what's new, why does this matter to me? Why is it relevant? And so, expert sources are going to be able to provide context and explain why something matters. So, the idea of just your run-of-the-mill construction CEO, it may not have something to add, but when you're taking a specific angle on something or they have a specific unique insight, that's perfect.
Great, thank you.
Great. Newsjacking. So this is responding to breaking news, as Doug mentioned earlier, with insights, opinions that will position you as a go-to source for media and increase your overall visibility. What you need to keep in mind, again, as Doug noted earlier, the news moves so fast. You need to respond quickly, and oftentimes with prepared commentary that's unique and, again, bullish, something that's different than what's already being said. When a cargo ship blocked the Suez Canal months past, it sent ripple effects into our supply chain. So we had quickly pivoted with commentary from our logistics clients. When the EU's top court voted on data transfers, we quickly pivoted to offer commentary from our client on privacy concerns. Newsjacking is also a great opportunity to break into some of those top-tier news outlets where you wouldn't have an opportunity otherwise.
Right.
Doug, do you have any do's and don'ts to share when it comes to newsjacking?
Yeah, I think that's a great. First of all, this term cracks me up. Like, I've not heard newsjacking. I feel like
it's a PR term, right?
Yeah, sometimes our clients are a little taken aback.
It's like the car's moving down the road. They shove the guy out of the news, and now they're driving the news. Right? It's a great term, but when you think about do's and don'ts, I'll give you an example. So the Derek Chauvin verdict came out. We knew it was coming out hours before it did. And so immediately our newsroom mobilized to get what did Boston business leaders think about the verdict. We didn't know which way it was going to go, but we literally queued up. All the reporters reached out to their sources, and they had queued up ready to respond once the verdict came out. Once the verdict did come out, we had the reported news responses and commentary, but then we also got in our email what you're describing. Several people had prepared comments. They sent them to our inbox, and because they came in within minutes of that verdict coming in, we were able to include some of that into the large roundup of responses we had for something like the Suez Canal. I think that's a longer term one, so timeliness is not as important, but that's where really the high profile person, sort of the top of the food chain executive who's going to have a unique insight, I think is where is going to take the place of or even give an idea to a local, in our case, a local media outlet.
Is there any don'ts when it comes to newsjacking? What's kind of poor form from your perspective?
Great question. So knowing our audience is critical. And so so I get a lot of these pitches 6-7 hours after a story has run. So it's a big national story. We did our story by 9 a.m. 3 in the afternoon, I'm getting a pitch saying, hey, we have this great expert on this topic. We're not going back to a story that we posted hours and hours earlier to add your comment. Like, that's not going to help. And if it's, if we can tell that it's been blasted to every media outlet, then we're like, you're not even giving us something exclusive to us. Right. So if we think that we've been spammed, if it's late, or if the person pitching it hasn't read our website and isn't even aware that we've already covered it, those are signs that you're not paying attention to what we're doing, you don't care about us and our newsroom exclusively, you don't understand our audience, and those are all big turnoffs.
Yep.
Great. Thank you. So public speaking, whether it's a trade show, a webinar, or LinkedIn Live, leveraging your bench of thought leaders for speaking engagements demonstrates you have a finger on the pulse of the industry, and it provides that very important third-party validation. And just to put into context what I mean by a bench of thought leaders, and I think we covered this earlier, you want to make sure that you have not only one person within your organization who can be that expert, because you have different departments and different expertise and subject matter experts within your organization that you want to be able to have them talk about a variety of different topics, whether that's supply chain, whether that's D&I, whether it's, logistics. Any sort of organization is going to have a bench of thought leaders. So making sure that you have those folks at the ready, and speaking opportunities are a great way to leverage that bench. These events are attended by peers, by possible prospects and collaborators who want to hear from that expert, that they want that forward thinking, they want innovative discussions. So the benefit for the audience when it comes to speaking engagements is really the opportunity to walk away with lessons learned, something actionable, where the benefit for the speaker is building credibility as someone who not only understands the industry, but how to apply that in a meaningful way.
Well, now that we've defined thought leadership, identified who makes a great thought leader, and reviewed content and platforms, let's dig into the real fun stuff, strategy. Here are a few questions to ask yourself before executing a thought leadership strategy, or really any public relations activity. So first, ask yourself, what do we stand for? Think about what your company's core beliefs are. Next, think about, what do we have to say that's different? As we mentioned, the media landscape is saturated with pitches and thought leaders. So what are your key differentiators, and what unique perspective can you bring to the table? Next, ask yourself, what does my audience want to hear? Think about what's trending in your industry right now, and if there are current events that you can use to insert your company into the conversation through newsjacking. Next, moving on to your audience. Where do they get their news? So this will help you identify the most impactful media targets for your strategy, and also just help you meet your audience where they are. What do you want them to do? What are your goals? Are you aiming to change perspectives on a certain topic? Are you looking to generate leads? A little bit of both. Keep your desired outcomes and takeaways in mind at all times as you're developing your strategy. And lastly, and I think most importantly, who cares? Between LinkedIn, social media in general, and the news, think about all the content you consume in just one day. Don't just strive to make noise, work to make impact. This is where quality over quantity really comes in. So ask yourself, why should someone care about this, and is it truly newsworthy?
Those are great points. It's got to pass that sniff test.
Right.
So the pitch. This is a thought leadership pitch, an example here on our screen that takes Biden's infrastructure bill, for example. And we've crafted this pitch for the media just to showcase a little bit about best practices and how to frame a pitch to a journalist. First, you want to make it short, concise. You don't want to give the entire story, just enough to make the reporter curious and want to learn a little bit more. You want to explain why your source is an expert and how the reporter can benefit from a conversation with them. And then lastly, make that ask and make sure that that ask is crystal clear. And what's also helpful is when you send an email, when you send a pitch to a reporter, have a compelling subject line that will grab their attention. It shouldn't be filled with jargon. It shouldn't be about some, product or your company, nothing like that should be in the subject line. It should be about what you can do for that media outlet or that reporter. So a subject line like expert on infrastructure bills impact in Boston could be a great example. Doug, we'd love to learn a little bit from you about what kind of pitches grab your attention and which end up in your garbage.
Yeah, I think that you're right. You're going right down the right lane here. The idea of asking who the audience is this newsworthy? That's a really hard question for a company to answer. Companies are busy doing their own business, and sometimes, PR practitioners are busy trying to get that person in front of the news. They haven't thought about whether it is news.
Right.
So a lot of times we'll get straight up marketing pitches that are disguised as a news pitch, and it's just not. So
Right.
how, thinking about what we're trying to do, and in this case, so the infrastructure example is great. There's 100 stories that one could write about that. So how, what am I writing about? And is that something that, that I'm looking for? And I'm the editor-in-chief, so I oversee a newsroom. So at any given day, 2 or 3 different reporters might be interested in that pitch.
Right.
So a lot of my time responding to emails is, did you send this to the reporter directly? And sometimes the answer is yes, and they didn't respond, but I think it's really important, so I'm sending it to you. In which case, then I look at it and say, I see why they didn't respond. It's not very specific. It's it's very general. They don't have a relationship with you. So, I think a lot of things at the end of the day revolve around a relationship. So, Kat, Emily, if you have given me a successful source in the past, I'm much more likely to trust the person, even if I don't know them, if it's coming from you. If, on the other hand, you served up a dud and the person was really bad and they just gave you these platitudes that you can't use,
Right.
then, I'm less likely to use that. So it really depends on knowing the reporter, knowing their audience, and are they working on a story right then? And if not, convince them why they should work on it, and who knows, you might have success.
Right, great point.
How do you respond typically, or your reporters, to pitches like, hey, how's it going? Wanted to know what you're working on. Because we've had some discussions internally at Matter on how those can sometimes have a negative bounce.
Right.
I've been in Boston in business journalism since 1998, and I can tell you, 15 years ago, I might have been able to respond to that. Today, with everything going on, I just do not have the time. I can't respond to that. So if I don't know the person and they're saying, hey, what are you working on? I can't respond to that. I just, and I'll guarantee you everyone in the newsroom is the same way. And that's where other modes, so if it's not an email, one of my reporters likes to be hit on Twitter. If you direct message her on Twitter, she'll probably see it and respond. Other reporters want, nobody wants a phone call anymore. Nobody wants voicemails. So email is really what you're trying to break through on, or you're trying to get them on social media. General, get to know you pitches are really hard. You got to have something that they can take away pretty immediately,
Right.
for them to get for you to get their attention.
Yeah, makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah.
So media tiers. There's tons of different outlets out there. We have our local outlets like the Boston Business Journal. We have business press like the Wall Street Journal and Squawk Box, tech media like TechCrunch, but they all crave something a little different.
Business media like Business Insider, Wall Street Journal, and Forbes, they crave data, a clear connection to a bigger trend, high-profile customer case studies, and rapid response to breaking news. They don't want a sales pitch or company jargon. They'll accept contributed content, but tend to be more selective. Tech media like TechCrunch, ZDNet, and Wired are less likely to accept contributed content. They want innovative, forward-looking ideas and predictions on varying topics such as AI, privacy, and robotics.
Trade media, in particular, like Healthcare Dive, Supply Chain Dive, they want commentary on industry trends. They want customers. They want customer success stories. They also love tips, tricks, best practices, and they're really the most likely to accept contributed content from a thought leader. And then we have government, legal, and social good media, like the Washington Post or Politico. These publications are reporting in real time. They move super fast. They don't have patience for runaround. So you need to be ready with a clearly defined point of view, any information you need to back up your position, and a spokesperson who can jump on the phone within minutes. They're not going to schedule an interview on a hot topic 2 weeks from now. They want commentary ASAP.
Right. And we also want to mention consumer media like BuzzFeed or Yahoo. Consumer media tends to be more product focused and less likely to accept thought leadership commentary, but when they do, it's typically around topics like shopping trends or consumer behavior. Well, now it is time for our Q&A. So let's dive into a few questions we've received from our participants.
Wonderful.
What topics should thought leaders stay away from?
That's a great question, Kat. A general rule of thumb, and I think we've teased this a little bit already throughout the presentation, but you want to stay in your lane. Don't comment on any area or industry in which you don't have experience. You also don't want to badmouth competitors. You always want to remain empathetic, especially when providing commentary in response to a crisis. Doug, is there anything you want to add to that from your perspective as a journalist?
I mean, I think that you would want someone who can comment on maybe not directly to a competitor where where they're coming out and sounding spiteful, but certainly if there's a trend that involves a competitor, we're always looking for someone who can take a contrarian point of view.
Right.
And so someone who's willing to take that contrarian point of view and say what's really going on. So we want that transparency, we want that directness, and I think that can be very helpful to a journalist who's working on deadline, trying to get a story out there. And just earlier what you had said about the Washington Post or the Wall Street Journal, I mean, for the Business Journal, it's the same thing. Super timely, super fast turnaround, don't have a lot of time to waste. I mean, those are all really, I think, really strong keys. And for regional media, like any of the business journals in our chain, the only thing you would layer onto that would be geographically based relevance, right? Something about this interview has to be local.
Right, absolutely.
And when it comes to the interview, what's for some of our marketing or communications or even some of our, C-suite or subject matter experts that might be on the line watching today, what are some tips you might have on the record versus off the record? Because a lot of times Kat and I are going to advise, everything, no matter if it says off the record, it's on the record.
Right.
So watch what you say, watch what comes out of your mouth. Do you have any, best practices there?
Yeah, I think I appreciate what you're saying. I think where the challenge comes in is what that means. So how do you define off the record? How do you define this is on background? What does it mean to have not for attribution? I mean, because different media outlets play this stuff differently, I think it's really important for the PR community to just get up front. What do you mean by that? When you say this is off the record, for the Business Journal, if we call you up or you have a set time in the conversation's going on, you're on the record from the minute you say hello. But if a CEO, especially someone who's got access to really important information that maybe they don't want it attributed to them, but it's important for the context of the story, we go off the record a lot and just say, look, I just need this background. I want to be able to get the context right. I want to be able to say why it matters. So I'm fine with not attributing this to you, but I really need to get to the truth here. And having a source who's willing to go off the record, share as much as they know, as much as possible, and then have that mutual trust, that's huge. For people who don't, if a CEO doesn't want to go off the record at all, they're going to stick to their talking points, we're probably not going to spend a lot of time calling them back in the future. I mean, we really want to get to the truth. And sometimes that means speaking on background and just trusting the reporter and trusting that source to be able to honor that.
Yeah, that's a great segue into our next question. So I think we touched on this a little bit, but how can thought leaders build relationships and trust with the media?
It takes a little bit of time. Certainly when you're trying to break in, if you don't have a relationship with a journalist and you're trying to break in, it's hard, right? Yeah. I mean, in the time that we've been sitting here, I just got probably 24 pitches, many of whom are from people I don't know. I'm not going to be able to respond to all of them. Some of them are going to be more relevant than others. So really, the best way is to, again, have the person know what they're talking about, provide a perspective the reporter can actually use, to comment on things that aren't directly related to that person's company or industry. In other words, it's not really that idea of self-promotion, it just turns off for a journalist really quickly. Right. So if they can give you a story like, hey, here's a trend. Like I'll talk to an accountant. Here's a trend that I saw related to municipal tax that's affecting most of the businesses in your audience, and they don't even know about it. And my question was, well, how do you know about it? And he says, because I keep getting calls from the CFOs, and they don't know what's going on.
Right.
I'm going to call this guy back next time I'm working on a story, and I just need an expert source, right?
Yep.
I'm going to call that person. So really sort of giving the reporter or journalist something that they can use right away, they're much more likely to call you back the next time.
Yep, that's great. Thank you.
And in terms of like the old way of building relationships, it's not like you guys have time to like go out for lunch with a PR person or chat on the phone too much. Really, those ways you're going to build that trust and that relationship is through offering a timely source and having that great first experience so that you get the call back.
Yeah, I think that that's key. You know, in our newsroom, we have what's called the rule of two, which is the reporters need to talk to at least 2 sources a day, one of whom they've never talked to before. So they're actively hunting. We're not just farming and taking in calls. We're actively hunting for experts, for news, for what's going on, because you know, the media is competitive. Like, we need to be out there talking to people all the time. You know, the other thing is we're trying to be more diverse in our sourcing. So if you can provide, you know, a person of color whom we haven't spoken with in the past, that is going to get our attention, because we really are trying to diversify who we're putting on the website and in the pages of our newspaper, and trying to broaden our the people that we're talking to on any given day.
And this isn't necessarily a question that came in from our audience, but something that just sparked in my brain. What about exclusive? We talked about that a little bit already with some of the different media tiers and types and how that's important. What's your view and the BBJ's stance on exclusives? Is that something that's going to get that and build that relationship?
Absolutely. I mean, these days, media companies have paywalls, right? We're expecting people to pay for the content that we're providing, and nobody's going to pay for something they can get for free.
Right.
So if you put out a press release at 6 a.m. and then you pitch something at 9 a.m., what is it that you're going to expect us to do with that? They can click on the news release and get most of the information we're going to get on this. So what's the story here, and how does it go beyond what the press release is? So more than ever, we're working under embargo. So we're saying, look, we want this exclusive. If you're not willing to do that, if you're going to give it to the Daily, you're going to give it to the Wall Street Journal, then we want it at the same time. And I'll give you a great example. So Moderna, local company.
Yep.
We cover Moderna just like anybody else. And for the past 18 months, whenever Moderna put out news, we got it at the same time as the Wall Street Journal and the Boston Globe and the Washington Post and everybody else. And we were able to report that. And we're going to report it as a local company. So we're going to report it differently. But all we ask is that we get it at the same time or earlier than our competitors. And if we can't do that, then we really can't work with it.
That's a great segue into my next question, too. That's not from the audience, but more out of curiosity. We're hearing more from reporters that, because they're short-staffed and, everyone's kind of running on a skeleton crew. What's the appropriate window of time to give you that embargo and exclusive before you want the coverage to land? Because a lot of times we have clients who have announcements coming out and they want us to start pitching that day, but typically is 48 hours, 72 hours. What's a good window?
Yeah, definitely. The earlier the better.
Yep.
So we have a print edition that comes out once a week, right? I mean, it comes out on Friday, we go to press Tuesday night. So people who pitch us on a Wednesday to get in Friday's paper, that's just silly.
Right.
But really, we're 24/7 daily on the web. That's where everybody's really breaking news. We have a morning edition newsletter, and we have a 3 p.m. afternoon edition newsletter. Our reporters are constantly looking at those newsletters as how their stories are going to get out. So they're thinking ahead, like, right now it's lunchtime. They already have their 3 o'clock story. They're thinking about, what am I going to write for tomorrow?
Yep.
So if you haven't given them you have something coming out tomorrow morning, and you haven't already contacted them, they've already got 2 other stories they're working on. They're just not going to fit it in.
Right.
So at least 24 to 48 hours minimum. 72 or more is better, for sure.
Thank you.
That's a great question. So one other question we received from members of our audience is, once you obtain that media coverage or you have an expert who's been quoted in the media, how should you leverage it?
I think my first piece of advice would be to share it on your company's social media channels and encourage your employees to do the same. It's also a great tool for your sales team, so they can use that coverage as third-party validation for their prospects. You can add it to shareholder or investor presentations, and also just leverage it across your company's marketing channels. So repurposing it on company blogs or adding quotes to your website.
Another question that we have is, how do I keep my thought leadership content or any sort of contributed content that I'm going to send into the media from being too salesy?
Yeah, it's definitely a fine line to walk, not being too self-promotional.
And we've had some content that's come across our desks that we've had to edit because it's too self-promotional.
Yep, yeah, it's a fine line. So just try to remember that you're promoting your expertise, not your company. So content should be focused on an issue, a trend, or a challenge. So for example, we have a client that provides mobile-powered industrial carts for warehousing and manufacturing. So instead of writing a blog about the carts themselves, we would write a piece focusing on the challenges facing the industry professionals today and how mobility can help them solve that pain point.
So really those tips and tricks and really having those actionable pieces for their direct audience is great. One more question that we had before we close, and I wanted to ask Doug, what are, just give us a glimpse as to what kind of some of the reporters are working on this week. What are the big topics that are folks listening to us today can read in the BBJ this week? What are the hottest stories that you've been covering, and is there anything that you wanted to highlight?
It's kind of we're going into the 4th of July week, so I think there's a sort of a mad scramble to make sure that we have news to actually report. And then at the same time, we're concerned about the news dump. So a lot of companies like to bury their news by waiting until right before the holiday comes and putting something out when they know journalists are going to be out barbecuing like the rest of them, and they know readers are not going to be as likely to read. So so right now we're focused on everything that you'd expect. There's the government is spending a ton of money on different industries and providing grants, and we're looking at that. The economy is reopening, so what does the return to work look like? And of course, we continue to report on the fallout of the racial reckoning from the Derek Chauvin verdict and the George Floyd murder, and the companies in our readership that are trying to diversify their leadership, their workforce, and so on. So we're focusing on all of those kind of things on any given day, and of course they're just the breaking news. Our tech reporters are talking about unicorn companies and what's beyond that, and we're just looking at all the national stuff, but from a local level.
Yeah. Does how much is COVID related angles or pitches that you might be getting from some expert sources still something that you're covering? Because we're curious, because it seems like there's starting to be this in the media, across the media, a slow roll back to kind of a new normal, and that no one's really covering like how a business pivoted because of COVID. We've been there, done that.
Are you sick of the COVID pitches that we're sending?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's I think that there is some COVID fatigue in the news audience. I mean, we're definitely seeing readership drop when it comes to COVID stories, but that's because a year ago everybody was just panicked at what they didn't know, and so readership levels across the country for all media outlets was at an all-time high last year. And today, because we're getting back to a new normal, we're seeing readership, our website traffic really closer to what it was like in 2019. So I do think if you were to say, hey, I have this great company and they did this great pivot, I'd be like, yeah, we probably wrote about them a year ago at this point. So what's new? What's going to be coming up this fall? As I do think the work from home issue is still relevant, but again, it is becoming tiresome to hear about hybrid work and what does that look like, and we've covered a lot of that stuff already. So just knowing what we've already covered, being a reader of the place you're pitching and not pitching something that we did 2 weeks ago, I think those are really important.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Well, this has been such a great discussion, and we're very excited to have a guest join us today for the Art of Thought Leadership, and we appreciate everybody at home's time in joining us today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Doug. Our next open door session is slated for Wednesday, July 28th at 12 Eastern, and we'll cover messaging your purpose, how to communicate your mission, vision, and CSR initiatives.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.